Welcome to This is Healthcare in America. I'm Reid Zeising, founder and CEO of Cherokee Legal Holdings. Today, the topics of the day: tort reform, the wasteful administrative costs in our healthcare system, and the need for pricing transparency. Let's start with tort reform and why it's likely the wrong target when we think about how to address the major issues regarding the cost of our healthcare system. Tort reform's the biggest misnomer. It's a catchy headline. Insurance defense lawyers use it to deflect from the real issues impacting healthcare, including coverage, wasteful expenses, and pricing transparency. To level set, tort reform advocates propose, amongst other things, procedural limits on the ability to file claims and the capping of awards of damages. Here's the problem with that, though. There are no real savings passed along to the people. States that have passed a wide variety of tort reform acts have shown it's the wrong target. These states saw healthcare costs either rise or fall slightly, but with no significant movement and no benefit to the overall cost of healthcare. If we're looking to make a dent in healthcare costs, realize that the direct costs of medical malpractice, which is the hot button, including premiums, damage awards in excess of premiums, and all associated litigation costs, represent no more than 2% of overall healthcare costs. We as a people have deference for medical practitioners. Showing that a doctor intentionally harmed someone is not taken lightly, and the vast majority of medical malpractice cases are defense verdicts. I know, yes, if your right arm should have been amputated and they remove your left arm, that is a problem that the legal system should and will address. Does the name Stella Liebeck ring a bell? No? Does the McDonald's headline of a $2.86 million jury award for spilling a cup of coffee ring a bell? I thought so. It was the 90s tort reform lightning rod. But please, watch the documentary Hot Coffee. Liebeck was taken to the hospital. She had suffered third-degree burns on 6% of her body. 16% of her body was severely burned. She remained in the hospital for weeks, and while she underwent skin grafting, which is one of the most painful recoveries imaginable, she lost 20 pounds, which was 20% of her body weight, reducing her to 83 pounds. After the hospital stay, Liebeck needed care for weeks. She suffered permanent disfigurement. After the incident, she was partially disabled for 2 years. Liebeck sought McDonald's to settle for $20,000 to cover her actual and anticipated medical expenses. Instead, the company offered her $800. After Ms. Liebeck was forced to retain an attorney in mediation, McDonald's refused the mediator's advice to settle for $225,000 just before trial. At trial, a jury awarded Ms. Liebeck $2.86 million, 2.7 of which was punitive damages. So what are punitive damages? Punitive damages go beyond compensating the aggravated party and are specifically designed to punish defendants whose conduct is considered grossly negligent or intentional. They are the only tool we have to affect corporate behavior that otherwise would go unchanged. The reason McDonald's held its coffee at 180 and 190 degrees was they sold large amounts of it to construction sites in vats to keep it warm, to the tune of $1.3 million a day. McDonald's itself admitted that drinking their coffee when it was served would burn your mouth and throat. In a story about the case published shortly after the verdict was delivered, one of the jurors said, over the course of the trial, he came to realize the case was about callous disregard for the safety of the people. Another juror said the facts were so overwhelmingly against the company, and that's because those jurors were able to hear all the facts, including those presented by McDonald's, and see the extent of Ms. Liebeck's injuries. Ask anyone who criticizes the case as a frivolous lawsuit that resulted in jackpot justice if they have watched Hot Coffee. If you have any doubts, please do. This is just one example of a $2.86 million award, ultimately settled for $640,000, that on the surface could sound excessive, but underneath was necessary to affect corporate behavior. Another target of tort reform is limiting the value of a human being's life. This affects only those whose lives are valuable to loved ones, who have been harmed or killed through no fault of their own. Otherwise, the system takes care of itself. Big business interests have won the hearts and minds of the average people. They've launched PR campaigns starting in the mid-'80s, continuing over the last 3 decades to convince you, the public, that we have out-of-control juries, too many frivolous lawsuits, and a civil justice system that needs reforming. They've used anecdotes, half-truths, and sometimes out-and-out lies in their efforts for one purpose: to put the limits on people's access to the court system, the one and only place where an average citizen can go toe-to-toe with those with money and power and still have a shot at justice. Because of the success of the PR campaigns paid for by tobacco, pharmaceutical, and insurance companies, to name a few, our civil justice system is not impartial. Jurors have been led to believe that large verdicts will affect their pocketbooks. Voters believe that we have a court system out of control that needs reforming. And although there are consumer advocacy groups who have attempted to set the story straight, there has yet to be enough money to launch the kind of PR campaign for consumers that can even begin to combat and challenge the public relation campaigns of pro-business and tort reform groups. Stop the focus on tort reform. The system works. Now let's focus on the biggest waste in the healthcare system: administrative costs. So what should we all be thinking about when it comes to a better way to healthcare? The second thing I want to talk about is the administrative waste that encases the healthcare system. No matter the source, it's generally agreed to 25 to 33% of healthcare costs can be attributed to administrative processing, waste, and quite frankly, the ridiculous and unnecessary back and forth between collections and claims departments. Do you recognize this? It's not a bill. How about this? Your claim has been submitted to your insurance carrier. There's nothing for you to do at this time. Then a series of invoices, payments, write-offs, and patient portions due. Each of these back and forths between insurance companies, medical providers, and patients is handled each time for each procedure by a $70,000 a year employee at both ends. Touching each of these, times 300 million people, times each specialty, creating billions of unnecessary paperwork shuffles. Will you please Google if air travel worked like healthcare? The absurdity of not being able to travel to the place you want, on the days you want, maybe having to use a separate company to handle your baggage and not even knowing what it would cost, is ridiculous. It wouldn't be accepted in the airline industry, the retail industry, the food industry, or quite frankly, any other industry. So why do we tolerate it in the healthcare space? Bills are incomprehensible. They're downright nonsensical. Forget about trying to get clarification on anything. This insurance company covered this piece. Another covered this piece. There's HIPAA disclosures. There's language requirements at the end of the document. Do you really know what's happened? It's a nightmare. Real change can only happen if we eliminate the wasteful spend that can be attributed to these administrative costs. In addition, let's look at hospitals. They're necessary, but they shouldn't be used as a primary care facility. Of every dollar spent in the US, another third of it goes to hospitals. When you take in hospital-owned physicians and clinics, 50%. Almost half of healthcare savings could be attributed to working on the hospital system. They're not the best place for primary care in many instances. Consider the lower cost imaging centers, ambulatory surgery centers versus expensive hospital operating theaters. Many services are inherently cheaper than the identical services in a hospital setting, just because of lower overhead, which leads me to pricing transparency. The last topic I'd like to touch on, it's pricing. There's a need for more transparency across the board. Have you ever in your life tried to call ahead to get pricing for a medical procedure? It's impossible, literally. And even if you were able to get some sort of ballpark answer, who knows how close to accurate it would eventually be. There are so many variables: age, sex, location, doctor, in-network, out-of-network, not to mention the actual procedure itself. It's literally impossible to know what something will cost until it starts making its way through the healthcare billing conundrum. And until your total is spit out at the end of this disparate system, you have no idea how much something's going to cost you. I highly encourage everyone to watch If Air Travel Worked Like Healthcare. It is completely absurd. The same transparency that exists in so many industries does not exist in healthcare. And while competition exists, competition without transparency is like a doctor performing surgery without a medical degree. You would never tolerate it. The move towards price transparency has the potential to create true competition amongst providers, with patients being able to see what's being charged for their test, their scan, or their procedure. It surely could curtail the practice of charging exorbitantly for routine care. Stop using tort reform as an excuse. Focus on reducing the administrative costs and increasing pricing transparency as starting points. Thank you for watching. Tune into the next installment of This is Healthcare in America. Have a great day and stay out of the hospital.